Hello YouTube, Skierkowa here. This is my rebuttal to David's opening position statement in my second video in our atheist morality debate. A couple things I want to say up front before we get started. First of all, I've deleted the preamble from this video version of my submission, mostly because half of it is especially irrelevant to a video format, and the entirety is more or less immaterial to the debate itself. So, moving on, I also want to say that because it has been so long since I was supposed to make this video, I feel I should comment that if you're reading along in the text and are interpreting this video as in any way a new submission, you will be very confused, even if you don't remember that you've already read everything I'm saying before, because this is very much out of order. Everything that I say in this video, as well as the inflection with which I say it, does not represent my current submission to the debate, or even necessarily my current thoughts and feelings, but represents what I intended to say and what I intended to convey when I originally wrote this submission. So, that being said, let's get started. David's position statement, apart from his thanking me, to which I say he is quite welcome, begins with this paragraph.
Although I am defending the negative position in this debate, I want to begin, oddly enough, by answering a qualified yes to the question at hand. I think that an atheistic worldview can in fact support a consistent morality. The nature of that morality, however, must be of an entirely different content and style from anything that most of us would recognize as morality.
Well, it would be unkind of me at this point to insist that he officially concede the debate before it's properly begun. However, it would be unkind to myself and to our readers to allow the goalposts to be so drastically moved without comment. So I will say that I don't perceive his opening remarks to have established the negative position he chose to defend, and I will invite David, if he feels it would be appropriate, to concede the point while continuing the discussion on a more narrowly defined topic. At any rate, he certainly did make a number of statements to which I take exception, and I'm perfectly willing to rebut those statements. The statement in the previous clip, in particular, is problematic. Used properly, the term morality has several coherent definitions to which either of us could appeal in making our case. If either of us felt the other was misusing the word, defining it too narrowly or too broadly, perhaps, we could appeal to the work of philosophers and scientists in redressing such a grievance. But by switching from morality to anything that most of us would recognize as morality, he has veiled the term in ontological subjectivity. While he does go on to provide a few particulars, this free working seeks to free him to say, in response to any cogent point I might make but which he does not like, well, yes, that's well and good, but it's not the morality that most of us recognize. Do I mean to say that he intends to do this? No, I don't. In fact, I very much doubt that any such malfeasance ever actually occurred to him. But such a thing can be done unintentionally, and at any rate, it is undisciplined to undermine the definitions of words, especially in a context where the words are so central to the topic that we're discussing.
We might summarize the bulk of pre-Christian morality by saying that the overarching ethic was might makes right. What we would call cruelty and brutality were, for most ancient peoples, accepted and even lauded aspects of everyday life.
I don't think that's the least bit true. The Greeks, who could not reasonably be included as part of the Jews, made a rich exploration of morality, from the good life to normative ethics, virtue ethics, all from a mostly secular perspective. It's impressive, in fact, to both Christians and atheists today, the extent to which Greek moral philosophers, including the pre-Socratics, were able to separate their syllogisms from the claims of the paganism which surrounded them. Rather than a purely Judeo-Christian society, we Westerners live in a post-Enlightenment society, and the Enlightenment was a revival of these Greek ideas. Of course, many Judeo-Christian ideas are preserved in synergy with the classical, but they cannot claim solitary patronage to our modern ethics. David's assertion also ignores the Jains, who were much less secular than the Greeks, but who were equally non-Jewish, and who preached an absolutely utter non-violence, extended even to animals such as insects, 9 centuries before Christ. It ignores Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and countless others. Even had he listed these as exceptions, this sort of sweeping generalization of the barbarian cultures offends the sensibilities of the serious anthropologist.
Now, let us confine ourselves, for the sake of simplicity, to a single example, infanticide. Infanticide, which is the discarding and or killing of unwanted infants, was a common practice in nearly all ancient cultures. It is, after all, very useful, as it serves the ends of both population control within a household as well as within a nation, and of eugenics, namely, it gets rid of frail, weak, sick infants who could pollute the gene pool of a people. Children who were born with disabilities, with defects, or often with the wrong, namely female, gender, were given a death sentence in most places in the ancient world. The callousness with which this subject was treated in the ancient world is exemplified in an ancient papyrus dated approximately 1 BCE, which contains the letter of a husband away on business to his pregnant wife at home. Quote, "Know that we are still even now in Alexandria. I urge you and beg you, be concerned about the child, and if I receive my wages soon, I will send them up to you." Sounds like a very concerned father, right? And then the very next sentence, "If by chance you give birth, if it is a boy, let it be. If it is a girl, throw it out." Most of us today, however, feel a visceral revulsion at the thought of abandoning or murdering a poor defenseless infant. We should, of course, feel this way. But the question we must ask is, why do we feel this way? Why could our ancient ancestors do all of this, apparently with little emotion, and that papyrus quote is indicative of the overall approach of ancient peoples to the topic of infanticide, while we today can't stand the thought? The answer is our cultural development. The Jews were one of the very few ancient peoples who did not practice infanticide. Why not? Because they believed in the innate value and dignity of each and every human life. And why do they believe this? Because they believed, as is stated in the opening chapters of their scriptures, that mankind is created in the image and likeness of God. They regarded human life, all human life, as sacred.
This is superficially true, although it is an argument ad populum. Either of us could easily find some aspect of modern morality which historically vindicates our argument. In my case, I might choose slavery. However, that statement has enough truth in it that we should examine it further. Particularly in the case of the Jews, they were somewhat conspicuous in their low rates of infanticide. Now, it would be a cheap and dirty trick for me to point out the numerous points in Scripture in which God commands the slaughter of foreign infants, particularly males, after the conquest of one or another enemy, city-state, or in some cases commits the slaughter himself. It would be a dirty trick because any descendant of Jewish culture, such as Christians like David, may take comfort in the fact that anthropologists do not consider any of those stories to be true. However, it seems strange that their text should be so at odds with its own teachings, particularly in a discussion like this, which connects morality directly to religion. Furthermore, Christians have inherited this tradition only imperfectly. As recently as our own colonial past, numerous Puritan communities established stubborn child laws, which allow parents to put their children to death. Farther back, early church fathers wrote in opposition to the practice of exposing infants, largely on the grounds that such children often grew up to become prostitutes. Now, it would not be fair to criticize them simply for having conservative sexual taboos, but as a rationale for protecting children, this is a far cry from the high-minded respect for human life to which we attribute such things today. Lastly, as to our modern culture, I'd like to defer to Dr. Larry Milner, writing for the Society of the Prevention of Infanticide, and I quote, "The major difference between the nature of infanticide in the 20th century when compared to the rest of recorded history, however, is due to the impact of one modern medical advancement, the widespread availability of safe and legal means of abortion. The ability to easily terminate a pregnancy, and thereby eliminate an unwanted child before it is born, has had a profound effect on the prevalence of infanticide." It would seem, then, that we have the convenience of being appalled by infanticide today. As a father, especially, I am horrified by the stories of tragedy befalling children. But as a man of my own time, it is impossible to say how my feelings might have changed by life in a primitive culture.
Now, it's a credit to Russell that he turns away from Nietzsche in horror, but his statements here are possibly the most pathetic, unphilosophical statements I've ever heard a philosopher speak, or seen a philosopher write, as the case is. Not in an appeal to the facts, he says, but in an appeal to the emotions. Would he or any other atheist accept this convoluted, backwards argument from the lips of a Christian? Should this really be taken seriously as an argument? All of the atheistic jargon about rationality and scientific progress fall out of the window as soon as one is confronted with the bare naked reality of the moral implications of an atheistic worldview.
There are two issues with David's reasoning here. Apparently, appealing to emotions is okay for Christians, but not for atheists, as if religious belief and emotional composition were a package deal. Human moral development, as I discussed in my introduction, is consistent precisely because of our emotional constitution. If no one had any emotions, there would be no such thing as morality, because nothing you do could possibly make anyone happy or sad or angry or content or anything else. In what universe would it make sense to say that I must ignore this reality simply because I don't believe in gods? Secondly, it is hypocritical to accuse Russell, but not Nietzsche, of appealing to emotion. The latter's misanthropic hate is in no way more reasonable or rational than the former's humanistic love. In fact, all normative ethical systems involve a synergy of objective and subjective. The attempt is made to discover an objective system for disposition among things and persons of subjective value. In mathematical terms, an analogy might be that the objective is the formula, the subjective is the variable. Say that David comes to my home, hotwires my car, and drives away with it. Normative ethical systems attempt to establish a more or less objective set of rules for establishing how ethical or unethical that action is. But nearly all such systems allow for variability, based on David's reasons for taking the car on one hand, and my feelings about his taking it on the other. I do not say, nor do I think, that morality is subjective, but it depends upon value, and value is subjectively assigned. Much of the rest of David's position statement is predicated on his assumption that ideas like social justice and morality are conspicuously Judeo-Christian, which I feel I refuted earlier in pointing out the numerous ethical systems which arose independently of that tradition, particularly those such as the Greek, which are also part of the Western DNA, so to speak. There are, though, a couple of points I want to quickly address before I run out of words.
What would an atheistic world look like? What would a world without all of these achievements, all the product of the Judeo-Christian tradition, look like? Would it look even remotely the same? Absolutely not. As was already mentioned, a purely rational, scientific worldview could possibly produce a morality that was even remotely similar to that which Christianity has produced. Scientifically, not all human beings are equal. Not all are of inherent worth and value. Rationally, there's no reason not to kill or abandon an unwanted infant, especially one that would be a great burden on his or her parents. Just as in the ancient pagan world, the logical scientific thing to do is to throw out the diseased, the disabled, and the sick. I think we can all agree that the logical, scientific, atheistic world is a terrifying place in which, to use Thomas Hobbes' famous words describing the state of nature, life is nasty, brutish, and short.
Why do theists insist on conflating descriptive Darwinian evolution with a proscriptive ethos? This vision of an atheistic society is about as fair as my submitting Atwood's Gilead as an example of a Christian society, while asserting that our own is the atheistic one. Even Spock's Hollywood strawman version of logic, to be knocked down by the humanist Dr. Bones, valued social justice. Apparently David believes that atheists are allowed no value but logic. When did I give up empathy? Why would I not feel the same primal, visceral love for my children that you feel? Did the Bible give you your emotions? I am a human. Love, empathy, compassion, reciprocity, these are all a part of what that means.
It is my opponent's burden to demonstrate how an atheist, or anyone who renounces the Judeo-Christian God and tradition, can continue espousing and practicing Judeo-Christian morality, and still possess an internally self-consistent philosophy. He must essentially demonstrate how it is that two very different bases can produce the same result. Or, if he agrees that of course it cannot, he must be able to describe for us a consistent atheistic morality which does not rely upon will and power and brute force. In the end, he must address not just my position, but those of his fellow atheist Friedrich Nietzsche, along with the century and a half of brutalities and epic failures in the great rational scientific experiment of modern atheism, a history which both Nietzsche and Dostoevsky accurately predicted.
I cannot help but be a bit annoyed at this attempt to tell me my burden, especially considering that this whole line of reasoning started with the qualified yes David gives in his opening paragraph. David proposed this topic to me, after all. I would not presume to accuse him of deliberately giving me a bait and switch, but after reading his concluding paragraph, I could do with a bit of reassurance on the fact. Apart from this, though, there is a reason that it is problematic to tell one's opponent what his burden is, and that is because it presumes that you accurately understand your opponent's perspective in the first place. In my case, let me assure you that David does not. For one thing, I have not renounced the Judeo-Christian tradition, or even its God, any more than I have renounced Mickey Mouse or the Bene Gesserit witches of Dune. For another, everything from my Christian upbringing that I have counted as good and kept was also said before Christ and also by non-Jews. Do you believe, David, that with great power becomes great responsibility? If so, then why have you renounced Spider-Man? Thanks for listening.